Hey guys, tonight we sink right into the muck of the Middle Ages. Imagine yourself stepping onto a narrow, cobbled street lined with crooked timber houses, their upper floors leaning in like gossiping neighbors about to touch noses. The first thing that hits you isn't the sight, it's the smell. A heavy mix of human waste, spoiled food, and damp straw clings to your nostrils so fiercely you wonder if it'll ever leave. You probably won't survive this, not because of the swords or plagues you've heard about, but because your delicate modern nose would surrender within minutes. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment with your location and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing the little community of night owls spread across the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wander further down the street, careful not to slip on something wet you don't dare identify. Buckets of waste were dumped straight out of windows earlier that morning, and unless the rain came to wash it away, the smell just baked under the sun. If you're unlucky, you might hear the squeal of a pig nosing through scraps in the gutter. Yes, people kept pigs inside cities, mostly as garbage disposals on legs. The authorities occasionally tried to ban them because they knocked people over, but the rules never stuck. Scholars still argue whether pigs made streets cleaner by eating waste or dirtier by leaving their own trails. Your modern instincts scream to cover your face, but the people around you barely flinch. They're used to this, born into it, raised among it, breathing it every day. Hygiene isn't something you do here. It's more like an afterthought, if that. You see a woman carrying a wicker basket of wilted greens. She stops to chat with a neighbor in russet-colored clothing. Their breath, probably a mix of onions, ale, and several weeks of unwashed teeth. The houses themselves add to the misery. Timber beams soaked with smoke from cooking fires, walls patched with mud that crumbles when it rains, and roofs that drip into buckets indoors. Open drains run between the cobblestones, sluggish streams of brown water filled with vegetable peels, stray feathers, and whatever else was tossed in. Rats dart in and out, bold as you like. They don't fear people. People fear them. And then comes the sound of bells. A church tower in the distance strikes noon, a deep iron clang that rolls through the street. The bells aren't just about time. They remind everyone when to pray, when to work, when to stop. The rhythm of life here is slow, mechanical, and oddly hypnotic. But standing there, you find it monotonous, the minutes stretching like soft wax. Every now and then, a horse clops past, hooves splashing in the muck. Its rider wears teal-dyed wool, the bright color showing off wealth. The horse's tail flicks at flies that refuse to leave it alone. Behind, a trail of droppings adds yet another layer to the street's perfume. Children play nearby, barefoot in the filth, their laughter carrying while they toss a ragged leather ball. One trips, falls face first, and simply wipes his cheek with his sleeve before joining back in. You shudder, but for them this is life. A more respectable man approaches, a merchant, judging by the scales hanging from his belt. He carries himself tall, though his boots are caked in mud like everyone else's. He tips his wool cap at passers-by and heads toward the market square. You follow, weaving through the crush of bodies, the babble of voices, and the occasional sharp shout of a trader hawking cabbages. The market is alive, but not in the exciting way you'd imagine. It's slow-moving, repetitive, a sea of brown and gray with only the occasional splash of indigo cloth to break it up. Someone nearby sneezes loudly, spraying into the air without a second thought. You recoil. No one else even notices. People carry handkerchiefs sometimes, but many just let the sickness flow. A fact to chew on. Medieval people did know about washing, and soap existed, usually made from animal fat and lye. But it was harsh, expensive, and left skin raw. So, unless you were preparing for a festival or church, you probably didn't bother. Your stomach rumbles, though hunger feels dangerous here. Food is being sold, flatbread, dried fish, bowls of gray stew bubbling over iron cauldrons. You catch the sour tang of ale wafting from a tavern door, the bitter yeast smell almost masking the stench outside. Almost, you might imagine grabbing a bite, but then you notice the flies crawling over everything, and suddenly your appetite vanishes. Scholars still argue whether medieval people even noticed the stink the way we do. Some say noses adapted. Others claim the smells were so normal they melted into the background of daily life. For you, though, every step through the street feels heavier, your chest tight with the weight of it all. And still, the day crawls on. You realize there's no relief from this, no clean air to run toward, no fresh corner to escape into. The whole city is one continuous smell, one unending mess. And tonight, when darkness falls, you'll lie down to sleep in it. You wake up groggy, your head heavy from the rough straw bed, and your first thought is, a bath would be nice. Except, in this world, baths are not exactly part of the daily routine. In fact, depending on who you are and where you live, you might only get one real bath every few weeks or months. Imagine the smell already clinging to your clothes, your hair, and even the air around you. Medieval people believed water could open up your pores and let in sickness, so washing too often wasn't just odd, it was considered risky. You probably won't survive the odor long enough to worry about the Black Death. Public bathhouses did exist, especially in cities, but they weren't quite what you're picturing. Instead of candlelit spas, think dim wooden rooms with steaming tubs that were often reused by multiple strangers. And yes, you step into the same water that half the town may have just climbed out of. If you're lucky, the water is lukewarm. If you're unlucky, it's cloudy with whatever someone before you left behind. And the truth? These bathhouses doubled as social hubs where gossip, food, and sometimes other services were on the menu. Scholars still argue whether this reputation for immorality was exaggerated or a fair reflection of what went down behind those steamy curtains. But in most small towns or villages, you wouldn't even have that option. Instead, washing meant grabbing a wooden bucket, filling it with cold river water, and trying to scrub down as best you could in a drafty room. Soap? Forget the lavender-scented bar you might keep by your sink. Medieval soap was often a harsh mix of animal fat and lye, more likely to peel your skin than leave it silky smooth. And you'll learn quickly that people didn't bother with shampoo. Instead, they dusted their hair with crushed herbs or even ashes. The effect? Let's just say you won't see any glossy shampoo commercials coming out of the 14th century. Now here's where it gets truly odd. Some physicians swore by wiping yourself down with a linen cloth instead of washing with water. Just rubbing your skin clean, they said, was safer. Imagine going weeks without a proper rinse, just relying on a cloth and maybe a sprinkle of rosewater if you were rich. It's both ridiculous and a little tragic. Still, you can't totally laugh at them. There were moments when hygiene seemed almost modern. In monasteries, for example, monks had rules about washing their hands before meals and bathing on certain holy days. But for most of the population, daily washing of the entire body just wasn't happening. Instead, you'd maybe wash your face, hands, and feet, and call it a day. The rest? Covered up with layers of wool and linen. Out of sight, out of mind. Now picture walking into a medieval town square on a hot summer day. You're surrounded by hundreds of people wearing heavy clothing, none of whom have bathed in weeks. The air is thick, not just with the smell of horses and open latrines, but with sweat soaked into every tunic and dress. You want to back away. But remember, you belong here now. This is your daily reality. Even perfumes and scented pouches stuffed with herbs could only mask so much. Oddly enough, there's some debate about whether medieval folks were truly filthier than we imagine. Scholars still argue whether the dirty Middle Ages stereotype is more a product of later propaganda than truth. There's evidence people did try to stay clean in small ways. Washing hands, rinsing their mouths, even scraping teeth with twigs. But by modern standards, let's be honest, one crowded bus ride in this world, and you'll be begging for your old deodorant stick. What really makes things worse is how hygiene ties into survival. Without good washing habits, lice and fleas thrive. Without baths, infections spread faster. And with no hot showers to soothe your aching back after a day in the fields, you're stuck going to bed coated in a layer of grime and sweat. The irony? Some believed that dirt itself formed a protective barrier, keeping illness away. And so, many went about their lives proudly protected by layers of filth. You glance at a nearby well, considering whether to dunk your head just for relief. But then you remember water supplies weren't always safe. Wells could be contaminated, rivers doubled as sewers, and boiling wasn't always practiced. So yes, you can splash your face, but you might also be splashing yourself with bacteria. If you survive dysentery, congratulations, you've earned your medieval stripes. As you rub your arms with a rough linen cloth, trying to mimic what people believed was enough, you realize this is only the start of your discomfort. Hygiene isn't a luxury here. It's a gamble, and the odds aren't in your favor. You run your tongue across your teeth and immediately regret it. They feel rough, gritty, and are those tiny holes? Welcome to the medieval mouth, where dental care is more myth than practice. Forget fluoride toothpaste and routine checkups. Instead, you're lucky if you own a rag to wipe your gums or a twig to scrape off the worst of the food stuck between your molars. Even the idea of brushing every day would sound laughably obsessive to most people here. By the time you're in your 20s, odds are your teeth are already yellow, chipped, or missing. Sugar, surprisingly, isn't the biggest culprit just yet. Ordinary bread, made with rough stone-ground flour, acts like sandpaper, grinding down your enamel day after day. Every bite you take leaves tiny scratches, and over years those scratches turn into craters. Add in a diet heavy on salted meats, no refrigeration, and virtually no concept of bacteria, and your mouth becomes a battlefield. When a toothache hits, your options are grim. Herbal remedies might give you a little relief. Cloves pressed against the tooth, or a rinse with wine boiled with sage. If you're lucky, the pain dulls for a night. If you're not, infection spreads fast. You might develop a visible abscess, your cheek swelling like a balloon. And remember, there are no antibiotics waiting for you. The pain just builds and builds until something gives. What about tooth extraction? Oh, they had ways. Picture sitting on a wobbly wooden stool while a local barber surgeon leans over you. He's not a dentist, those don't exist yet, but he does know how to cut hair, let blood, and yes, yank teeth. There's no anesthesia except maybe a shot of strong ale. He clamps down with iron pliers, twists, and pulls. The crunch you hear isn't just bone. It's your hope of ever eating comfortably again. You might survive, but the risk of infection is high, and sometimes the jawbone itself is damaged. Scholars still argue whether these extractions were more about genuine care or just brutal necessity. Oddly enough, there's some charm in the little things people did to try to keep fresh. A wealthy lady might chew on fennel seeds, or carry a pouch of mint leaves to ward off bad breath. Monks sometimes recommended rinsing with salt water or vinegar, and peasants, with less access to luxuries, might just chew on a stick until the fibers frayed into a brush. But none of these prevented the slow, inevitable rot. One quirky detail: some people believed worms lived inside your teeth and caused pain. Imagine someone peering into your mouth with a candle, insisting they see a tiny worm wriggling inside your molar. Treatments to drive the worm out included smoke, oils, and even charms whispered by traveling healers. Sounds absurd now, but when you're desperate and every chew feels like fire, you'd try anything. And let's not forget social impact. Imagine leaning in to talk to someone at market, only for them to recoil at your breath. Or sitting in church, packed shoulder to shoulder, the air thick not just with incense but with the unmistakable smell of dozens of decaying mouths. Clean smiles aren't just rare, they're practically non-existent. Teeth are tools, not beauty symbols. The idea of flashing pearly whites would be as alien here as Wi-Fi. Here's the cruelest twist. Nobles actually ended up with worse teeth than peasants once sugar began trickling into Europe. Rich households indulged in candied fruits, spiced pastries, and imported sweets. Over time, these luxuries carved through their enamel faster than the rough bread of the poor. In fact, blackened teeth sometimes became a strange status symbol, a sign that you were wealthy enough to afford sugar. Scholars still debate whether this was an intentional fashion statement or just an unfortunate side effect of excess. You sit back, jaw aching even though you haven't had a tooth pulled yet, and realize something chilling. Without modern dentistry, you wouldn't last long. One rotten molar could spiral into a deadly infection. And the worst part? Everyone around you accepts it as normal. Pain isn't an exception here. It's the rhythm of daily life. So as you clutch your jaw, listening to the distant clang of the blacksmith's hammer, You realize survival in the medieval world isn't just about dodging plagues and wars. It starts in your mouth, with every gritty bite of bread, every gulp of wine, and every night spent praying that tomorrow won't bring the kind of pain that no herb or charm can cure. You scratch the back of your neck, and your fingers come away with a tiny black speck that wriggles before vanishing in the rushes on the floor. Congratulations, you've just met your new roommates. Lice, fleas, and all their cheerful crawling cousins. No matter who you are, peasant, monk, or even noble, these little parasites don't discriminate. You carry them in your hair, in your linen shirt, and in your straw mattress. And the worst part? Everyone around you does too, so no one even bats an eye. Imagine trying to sleep. You settle onto your bed. If you're lucky, it's a wooden frame with a sack of straw. If not, just a pile of hay on the floor. Within minutes, you feel the telltale tickle on your scalp, the pinprick bite along your waist, or the maddening itch crawling up your leg. You scratch, roll over, scratch again until your skin burns with red welts. People joked about it, but only because complaining wouldn't make it go away. Bathing rarely happens, sometimes only once or twice a year. Lice thrive in the tangled, oily hair that most people never fully wash. A common remedy is simply shaving your head, which is why monks wore tonsures and peasants often hacked their hair short. But even then, the bugs return. They hide in your clothes, seams, and bedding, waiting to crawl right back. Scholars still argue whether people really noticed how filthy they were, or if constant scratching became such a background noise of life that it hardly registered. Fleas, meanwhile, are even worse. They bounce off the rushes scattered across your floor, bite ankles, and carry something far deadlier: plague. Long before anyone connected fleas to rats and rats to disease, people blamed foul air or divine punishment. But here you are, with swollen itchy bumps, not realizing that one unlucky flea bite could spiral into fever and blackened skin within days. One odd detail: some households scattered aromatic herbs like lavender, mint, or rosemary into their floor rushes, believing the smell would drive the insects away. It may have helped a little, but more likely it just made the room smell faintly pleasant while the fleas kept biting. Nobles might even perfume their clothes to cover up the stink. But perfume doesn't stop a determined louse. If you're traveling, things get even worse. Imagine squeezing into an inn for the night, crammed onto a straw mattress that a dozen strangers have used before you. Each one left behind a thriving colony of lice and fleas, now eager for your warm body. You drift off to sleep, only to wake up scratching in the dark, praying the itching won't drive you insane. Some medieval travelers actually wrote about preferring the road to the inn, because at least under the stars you only had to share your skin with what you already carried. There's also bedbugs, though they're rarely described in medieval records. You can bet they were there. Picture waking up with little rows of red dots up your arm, and no clue what caused them. You scratch raw patches until they scab, risking infection from dirty nails. Nobody calls it gross because for them this is normal. You simply live itchy and you die itchy. Everyday life is a game of balancing discomfort. At the market, you watch people casually scratching themselves mid-conversation. During church, someone might discreetly reach under their tunic to rub at a swarm along their ribs. No one laughs because they're all doing the same thing. Imagine trying to focus on prayer while your scalp feels alive. It's a small, constant torture that modern comforts have erased from your world. But here, it's simply part of existing. Here's a quirky twist. Medieval doctors sometimes prescribed soaking clothes in vinegar or urine to kill the bugs. Yes, urine. You can almost smell the acrid sting as you imagine someone dunking their tunic, wringing it out, and putting it back on. Did it work? Maybe for a day. Then the scratching started again. As you sit by a smoky fire, flicking another flea off your wrist, you realize survival here isn't just about avoiding night swords or catching food for dinner. It's about enduring the relentless itch, the creeping feeling of something crawling through your hair, the knowledge that your skin is never truly yours. And the scariest thought? There's no cure. Just scratch, suffer, and hope you're strong enough to live through the night without losing your sanity. You step out of your cramped little room, thinking maybe fresh air will help. Bad move. The moment you hit the street, the stench slams into you like a wall. It's not just one smell. It's a layered symphony of filth. Imagine rotting vegetables, animal dung, human waste, smoke from damp firewood, and the sour tang of beer slopped out of mugs. Welcome to your morning walk in a medieval city. Streets are narrow, barely wide enough for a cart. Houses lean toward each other so steeply that sometimes you can touch both walls with your hands. That means sunlight rarely reaches the ground, and puddles, if you can even call them that, fester into sludge. You squelch forward, your boots sucking in and out of muck that looks suspiciously darker than mud. One wrong step, and you're ankle-deep in something you'd rather not think about. Let's talk chamber pots. People relieve themselves in small buckets or clay pots kept in bedrooms. At night, if you feel nature calling, you shuffle to the corner, squat, and hope not to spill. In the morning, the pot is dumped, sometimes in a cesspit, but often simply out the nearest window. That's right. You might be walking down the street, minding your business, when someone above shouts, "Gardaloo!" a warning cry, and a stream of waste splashes dangerously close. If they forget to shout, well, you're just unlucky. Scholars still argue whether towns enforced cleanup rules or mostly turned a blind eye. But let's be honest, rules don't stop stink. And then there are the animals. Pigs snuffle freely through the trash, dogs fight over bones, and horses clop past, leaving steaming piles behind. A single rainstorm churns it all together into a putrid soup. Imagine children playing nearby, chasing hoops or sticks, their shoes caked in the same filth that carries disease. No one considers it odd. It's just how life works. One odd detail. Some cities did try to manage the mess. In London, rakers shoveled human waste into carts and hauled it outside the walls to dump in pits. Paris experimented with covered drains. But these were patchwork solutions. Most of the time, streets simply stank, and everyone adapted by carrying scented pomanders or pressing herbs to their noses. You pass a butcher's stall, and it only adds to the chaos. Blood and guts flow into the gutter, mingling with runoff from tanneries and dye workshops. The water turns strange colors, sometimes red, sometimes green, always foul. You wonder how anyone could eat food grown near such streams. But hunger trumps disgust. The bread you ate earlier probably owes some of its flavor to grain watered by sewage. Here's the kicker. Medieval people actually thought bad smells themselves could make you sick. Miasma theory, they called it, the belief that foul air carried disease. They weren't entirely wrong, since living in filth definitely spread illness. But instead of targeting bacteria, which no one knew existed, people burned incense or carried sweet-smelling flowers to ward off the bad air. Scholars still debate how much this belief slowed real progress in sanitation. But standing here, gagging at the stench, you can see why they thought smell equaled sickness. The soundscape matches the smell. You hear slop hitting the street, pigs grunting, hawkers shouting, and the distant clang of church bells. Rats scurry openly, fat from the endless food scraps, and you swear you see one disappear into a pile of straw right under someone's door. These streets aren't just unpleasant. They're alive, crawling, and dangerous. So you pull your cloak tighter, breathing through the fabric, though it doesn't help much. You glance upward, hoping for a patch of sky, but the looming timber frames lean so close they blot it out. You realize with sinking dread, there's no escape. Inside, you itch with lice. Outside, you choke on filth. And yet, the people around you walk on as if nothing's wrong. To them, this is life. To you, it's a nightmare you probably wouldn't survive a week in. You can't take it anymore. After days of scratching lice bites and gagging on the stench of the streets, the idea of a wash sounds like heaven. But here's the catch. In medieval life, baths are a rare luxury. Most people don't bathe often at all. Some only once or twice a year. Your sweat, grime, and fleas are basically permanent companions. Still, when you do get the chance, it usually means heading to the public bathhouse. Picture a dim, steamy building with wooden tubs lined up, water hauled in buckets from the river and heated over fires. Men and women sometimes bathe together, at least in the earlier Middle Ages, which scandalizes later moralists. You strip down, sinking into the warm water, sighing as the filth peels off your skin. But don't get too comfortable, the water isn't exactly clean. You're sharing it with half the town. and everyone's sweat, dirt, and scabs flowed in the surface like little reminders that hygiene is relative. One mainstream historical fact. Bathhouses were actually popular in many European cities until around the 16th century. People didn't just wash there, they ate, drank, and even struck business deals while sitting in the tubs. Some bathhouses doubled as brothels, which gave them a scandalous reputation later on. Scholars still argue whether the decline of public bathing came mainly from the spread of syphilis, the Protestant Reformation's emphasis on modesty, or simple fear of catching the plague in warm, crowded rooms. But if you're poor, even this kind of bathhouse is beyond reach. You're more likely to make do with a bucket of cold water or, more often, just nothing at all. Washing your face and hands occasionally counts as clean. For hair, maybe you rub in ashes or sand to strip out grease, then rinse in whatever stream isn't too foul. Soap exists, but it's harsh, lye-based, and often used more for scrubbing clothes than bodies. Imagine lathering up only to feel your skin sting and peel afterward. One odd detail. Nobles sometimes had scented baths prepared with herbs, petals, and even milk. Imagine sinking into a tub sprinkled with rose leaves, your servants fanning away the steam. Of course, while you're soaking like royalty, lice are hiding in your clothes on the bench, waiting patiently to hop back on once you dry off. Cleanliness is never permanent here. It's a fleeting illusion. You towel off, or rather, rub yourself with a rough linen cloth, and realize bathing itself isn't the hardest part. The real issue is what comes after. With no deodorant, you'll start smelling again within hours, especially if you head outside and step back into those stinking streets. Some medieval folks tried to fight it with perfumes, pomanders, or even carrying sponges soaked in vinegar. But really, you're just masking odor with another odor. Imagine lying in bed after your rare wash day, your skin tingling, your hair lighter without weeks of oil weighing it down. You feel, for the first time, almost human again. And then the scratching starts. A flea that was hiding in the straw mattress nips your ankle, and you sigh, realizing the bath was only a brief reprieve. No matter how clean you feel for a moment, this world pulls you back into filth. Your stomach growls, reminding you that surviving medieval life isn't just about dodging filth. It's about eating whatever you can find. And let's be clear, food here is not the Instagram-worthy feast you're used to. Most of it is bland, stale, or downright spoiled. If you're a peasant, your diet is almost entirely bread. Coarse, dark loaves made from barley, rye, or oats. They're heavy, dense, and taste faintly of grit because the flour still carries traces of stone from the mill. Each bite scrapes your teeth like sandpaper. Meat? That's a festival luxury. Most days you'll eat pottage, a mushy stew of grains, and maybe a few vegetables if you've got them. Imagine the same gray bowl of slop for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Not very appetizing, but it keeps you alive. Now, if you're in a wealthier household, your diet looks a bit fancier. Nobles eat pork, venison, or poultry, spiced with saffron, cinnamon, or pepper imported at absurd cost. But here's the problem. No refrigerators. Meat is salted, smoked, or pickled to keep it from rotting. Even then, you'll sometimes bite into a piece that tastes questionable. People drown food in spices not just for flavor, but to mask the funk of age. Scholars still argue whether medieval folks realized how spoiled their food was, or if their palates simply adapted to what we'd consider inedible. One quirky detail: some medieval cookbooks recommend adding a splash of vinegar or honey to disguise off flavors. So when your stew tastes tangy sweet, it might just be hiding the fact that the mutton was a little too old. Ale too often goes sour quickly. People drink it anyway, because water is even worse. Speaking of water, don't drink it. Rivers and wells are cesspools of waste. Every gulp risks dysentery, parasites, or worse. Instead, you drink weak beer or small ale. Barely alcoholic, but safer than water. Even children guzzle it daily. You sit down to supper and see a toddler lifting a mug bigger than their head, sipping away. Like it's normal, because it is. At the market, food looks tempting, but reality hits fast. Fish laid out on stalls has been sitting all day in the sun, buzzing with flies. Milk turns sour within hours, and cheese often comes crawling with maggots. And yet, people eat it. Protein is protein. A little wriggling doesn't stop a hungry stomach. One odd cultural twist. Fasting rules of the church forbid meat on certain days, which means fish is in high demand. But supply doesn't always meet need. So, clever cooks invent mock meats, fish molded into sausage shapes, or almond paste shaped like eggs. Imagine biting into what looks like a roast bird, only to find it's ground herring wrapped in dough. Creative, yes. Delicious? Questionable. Food isn't just about taste, it's about survival. Poor harvest? Your village starves. Grain prices rise and riots break out. The fear of famine haunts everyone. Even nobles worry, because when peasants starve, rebellion brews. Every bite you chew carries the weight of uncertainty. Will next year's fields be generous or barren? As you wipe your mouth after a thin meal of bread and watery stew, you realize something. In this world, food isn't pleasure. It's fuel. And sometimes it's poison. Eat too little, you waste away. Eat spoiled meat, you gamble with your life. Either way, the medieval table is no banquet. It's a constant negotiation between hunger, risk, and the faint hope of flavor. Your stomach churns after that questionable stew, and suddenly you face a universal truth. What goes in must come out. But in medieval times, answering nature's call is not a private, clean affair. It's another daily ordeal. If you're a peasant, the toilet is the nearest field, hedge, or ditch. You squat, do your business, and cover it with a handful of soil if you're polite. Most don't even bother. Chickens peck nearby, pigs snuffle at the mess, and rain carries it toward the nearest stream. Remember that don't drink the water rule? This is why. The stream that runs through the village isn't just for laundry and drinking. It's also the sewer. In towns, things get a bit more complicated. Many houses have cesspits, deep holes dug under or beside the building, lined with stone or wood. You climb onto a crude wooden seat, do your business, and it drops straight into the pit below. At first, this feels like luxury. No squatting in the open air, no wind nipping your rear. But after a few months, the pit fills. The smell rises through the floorboards until your entire house reeks of ammonia and rot. Families hire gong farmers, men whose job is to climb down, shovel the filth out, and cart it away at night. Imagine being knee-deep in sludge with nothing but a wooden spade, and you'll understand why gong farmers were paid well but lived miserably. Scholars still argue whether these cesspit cleanings kept cities healthier or simply spread disease further when the waste was dumped outside the walls. One odd detail. Some castles had garderobes, stone closets with holes that dropped waste straight down the outer walls into a moat. Sounds clever, until you remember moats weren't always full of water. Sometimes they were just foul ditches where waste piled up, baking in the sun. Picture defending your fortress while standing above a moat that smells like every privy in town combined. Not exactly glorious. Paper? Forget it. You wipe with straw, moss, or scraps of linen if you're lucky. Sometimes just your hand, rinsed quickly in water afterward. You wince at the rough texture of straw against skin, realizing softness is a modern invention. Toilet paper is centuries away. Public latrines do exist in some larger cities. Long benches with holes side by side, no partitions. Privacy? Non-existent. You sit elbow to elbow with strangers, trying to carry on polite conversation while ignoring the sounds and smells around you. The waste drops into a shared channel beneath, often flowing straight into the river. Imagine the riverbank downstream, children splashing and women washing clothes, all while human waste floats by. And then, there's the ever-present risk. Cesspits sometimes collapse. Imagine sitting in your privy when the floor gives way and you tumble into the filth below. There are recorded cases of people suffocating in sewage. Death by chamber pot is not a noble ending, but it's a medieval reality. One quirky cultural twist: some believed waste itself had medicinal value. Urine was used in tanning leather, whitening cloth, even brushing teeth. Physicians sometimes inspected urine to diagnose illness, swirling it in glass flasks and declaring whether you'd live or die. You can almost see a doctor squinting at a yellow jar, nodding sagely while you stand there itchy, smelly, and very, very uncomfortable. As you finish your business, awkward, messy, and humiliating. You realize there's no such thing as fresh here. Waste is everywhere. Under your feet, in your water, drifting in the air. Survival isn't just about finding food or shelter. It's about living in a world where the line between clean and filthy doesn't exist. And as you step back into the street, breathing shallowly, you accept the truth. You probably won't last long in a city where even going to the bathroom could kill you. Your tunic itches against your skin, and for good reason. It hasn't been washed properly in weeks, maybe months. In medieval times, clean clothes doesn't mean crisp laundry scented with detergent. It means slightly less filthy than yesterday. For peasants, your wardrobe is painfully limited. You own one or maybe two sets of clothes, usually made from coarse wool or homespun linen. When one outfit gets dirty, you keep wearing it. When it's torn, you patch it. When it's stiff with sweat, you air it out near the fire and hope the smoke covers the smell. The idea of tossing clothes into a washing machine with soap and fabric softener? Forget it. Even the wealthy don't enjoy that luxury. Washing, when it does happen, is brutal. Women haul garments to the nearest stream or trough, soaking them in cold water, beating them against rocks or wooden boards. If you're lucky, lye soap, a caustic mixture of animal fat and ashes, is used. The soap stings your hands and burns your eyes, but it strips grease from fabric. The problem? It also strips the skin from your knuckles. You can picture your sleeves fraying and your tunic shrinking as the harsh soap eats away at the fibers. Then there's lice. Always lice. No matter how often you wash or pretend to wash, your seams and collars crawl with tiny biting insects. You scratch absent-mindedly, feeling the constant itch on your scalp and wrists. Lice infestations are so common that special combs are crafted just to pull them out. Scholars still argue whether the constant presence of lice actually helped people build some immunity to worse parasites, or whether it just made everyone miserable. Either way, you don't get rid of them. At best, you pick them off and crack them between your thumbnails, one by one, hearing that tiny pop in the quiet of night. Oddly enough, medieval people do notice when you reek. Smells are part of life, but a particularly pungent person still earns side glances. In wealthier households, linens are scented with herbs, lavender, rosemary, or thyme, stuffed into chests or sewn into pouches. These don't actually kill the stink, but they mask it. For special occasions, nobles even wear fur-lined garments sprayed with rose water or vinegar. You, as a commoner, can't dream of that luxury. At best, you rub a handful of crushed mint on your tunic and hope it distracts from the sweat stains spreading under your arms. There's another quirk. Laundry day itself can be a danger. Water drawn from rivers is often contaminated with waste. Dipping your clothes means exposing them to bacteria and parasites. After scrubbing, they're hung outside to dry in the open air, sometimes stolen by passing neighbors or blown into the mud. By the time you put them back on, they're stiff, scratchy, and only slightly less rank than before. The wealthy have servants to handle laundry, but even noble garments face the same problem. Soap is scarce, water is dirty, and drying is slow. The difference is in fabric. While peasants wear itchy wool and linen, nobles drape themselves in silks, velvets, and dyed fabrics that fade and stain quickly. Imagine spilling stew on your bright crimson gown, knowing it may never come out. Wealth buys beauty, not hygiene. Here's a peculiar detail. Many people wore undergarments not for modesty, but to protect expensive outer clothing. Your sweat and grime soaked into the underlayer, which was easier to wash or replace. Think of it as a medieval t-shirt, except made of rough linen, tied at the waist and crawling with fleas. By nightfall, your clothes feel like a second skin, damp with sweat, prickling with lice, and heavy with smoke. You shift uncomfortably, but there's no escape. Changing into fresh clothes simply means slipping into a different set of unwashed rags. True cleanliness is impossible. You lie down in the straw, scratching your arm raw, and realize this. In a world where filth is constant, comfort is a fantasy. You lie down at the end of a long day, aching from hauling wood, fetching water, or just surviving the grime of medieval life. You think you've earned some rest, but the moment you settle into the straw mattress, you feel it, the unmistakable scuttling of tiny legs against your skin. Your bed is alive and not in a good way. Most medieval beds aren't plush feather-stuffed mattresses. For peasants, bed means a sack of straw, reeds, or hay, stuffed loosely into a coarse linen cover, if you're lucky. Over time, the straw rots, compresses, and attracts unwelcome guests. Fleas, lice, mites, and bedbugs. You scratch at your ankles, then your elbows, realizing you're covered in red bites before sleep has even come. The scratching never stops. Here's the kicker. Even wealthier folk, with their carved wooden bed frames and feather-filled mattresses, don't escape. Feather beds are cozy, sure, but they're also ideal breeding grounds for vermin. Bed hangings and curtains, meant for warmth and privacy, trap heat and body moisture, turning the space into a paradise for bugs. Imagine pulling those curtains closed at night and creating your own little insect sauna. A mainstream historical fact slides in here. Fleas and lice weren't just annoyances. They were deadly. The infamous Black Death that swept through Europe in the 14th century spread partly thanks to flea bites. Every scratch could be more than an itch, it could be the start of a plague. The idea that your bed might literally kill you wasn't a distant fear. It was a nightly gamble.
Odd quirks abound.
Some households tried sprinkling herbs, lavender, rue, wormwood, into bedding to ward off pests. Others burned aromatic smoke around sleeping areas, hoping to suffocate the bugs. Did it work? Not really. You'd still wake up scratching, though maybe smelling faintly of thyme. Scholars still argue whether the medieval reliance on smoke and herbs had any real effect on parasites, or whether it was just a placebo that gave people false comfort. Sharing beds was common too. Privacy is rare in medieval homes, so you often pile in with family members, or, if you're traveling, even strangers at an inn. Imagine trying to sleep with 3 bodies pressed up against you, all of you rolling over on lumpy straw, swatting at fleas in the dark. A good night's rest? Forget it. Even if the bugs don't wake you, the chorus of snores and coughs will. In winter, things don't improve. Straw bedding grows damp and moldy, releasing a sour smell that sticks in your nose. You sneeze, you cough, and you burrow deeper, but damp hay never really warms. Meanwhile, rats scurry nearby, drawn to crumbs left in the rushes or hidden in bedding. Sometimes they climb into beds themselves, nibbling on whatever they can find, including you.
Odd quirks abound.
Some households tried sprinkling herbs, lavender, rue, wormwood, into bedding to ward off pests. Others burned aromatic smoke around sleeping areas, hoping to suffocate the bugs. Did it work? Not really. You'd still wake up scratching, though maybe smelling faintly of thyme. Scholars still argue whether the medieval reliance on smoke and herbs had any real effect on parasites, or whether it was just a placebo that gave people false comfort. Sharing beds was common too. Privacy is rare in medieval homes, so you often pile in with family members, or, if you're traveling, even strangers at an inn. Imagine trying to sleep with 3 bodies pressed up against you, all of you rolling over on lumpy straw, swatting at fleas in the dark. A good night's rest? Forget it. Even if the bugs don't wake you, the chorus of snores and coughs will. In winter, things don't improve. Straw bedding grows damp and moldy, releasing a sour smell that sticks in your nose. You sneeze, you cough, and you burrow deeper, but damp hay never really warms. Meanwhile, rats scurry nearby, drawn to crumbs left in the rushes or hidden in bedding. Sometimes they climb into beds themselves, nibbling on whatever they can find, including you. And let's not romanticize noble sleep either. Yes, lords and ladies might rest on feather beds draped with fine linens, but those linens were rarely washed. Body oils, perfumes, spilled wine, and sweat seeped into fabrics, feeding mites and lice. It was luxury wrapped around discomfort. So you roll over again, itching, sweating, surrounded by vermin. Sleep doesn't come easily, and when it finally does, it's shallow, restless, haunted by the sensation of crawling things. You wake scratching, sore, and exhausted. In a place where rest should restore you, the bed becomes another battlefield. You wake up itchy, bleary-eyed, and still tired from the vermin-infested bed. You think maybe, just maybe, you'll finally get clean today. And where do you go for that? The public bathhouse. Forget long private soaks in a porcelain tub. Your medieval spa day is more like a crowded social gathering with equal parts gossip, grime, and questionable hygiene practices. Picture it. A wooden building by a river, steam seeping from gaps in the walls, the faint smell of boiled herbs mixing with something less pleasant. You push open the creaking door, and there it is, a wide wooden tub, already filled with cloudy water. A few people sit shoulder to shoulder, splashing, chatting, scrubbing. And yes, that same water has already seen several bodies before yours. Privacy is a luxury, not a guarantee. Bathhouses in medieval towns served as community hubs, not just places to wash. Men and women sometimes bathed together, depending on the era and the strictness of local rules. Can you imagine? You step in hoping to relax, but instead you're face to face with your neighbor, your baker, and probably your landlord. All half naked, all talking about market prices or last Sunday's sermon. The atmosphere is a mix of steamy camaraderie and awkward avoidance of eye contact. Here's a mainstream historical fact for you. In the 13th and 14th centuries, public bathhouses were widespread across Europe. They weren't just for the wealthy. Even common folk could scrape together a few coins for a soak. Bathhouses doubled as meeting places, business venues, and yes, sometimes as fronts for less respectable activities. That's right, many bathhouses became infamous for mixing bathing with brothels. Washing up and negotiating more intimate services often went hand in hand. 06. And then comes the odd detail. Bath attendants used to rent out the very same bathwater multiple times a day. Imagine stepping into a tub where 3 families have already washed their hair, rinsed their laundry, and maybe even cleaned their kids. People sometimes joked about water so dirty it had more personality than the bathers themselves. And yet, the warm soak was still considered worth it. Scholars still argue whether medieval people actually believed baths were healthy or dangerous. Some physicians warned that hot water opened the pores and made the body vulnerable to disease. Others swore by herbal baths for healing everything from stomach aches to melancholy. You, meanwhile, just hope the floating clump next to your arm is a stray bit of straw and not, well, something worse. Bathhouses also had their own rituals. Attendants might rub you down with rough cloths to scrape away dead skin, then sprinkle perfumed powders over your damp body to leave you fresh. But fresh was relative. The building reeked of steam, mildew, and sweaty bodies. Perfume was less about pleasant smells and more about covering up the overpowering stench. Conversations buzz around you. 2 men argue about grain prices. A group of women whisper about who's having an affair. A priest in the corner lectures about sin while trying not to stare too hard at anyone. Bathhouses were where rumors spread faster than fleas, where reputations were made or ruined. Your very presence here might set tongues wagging. Were you genuinely here to wash, or seeking something else? And then there's the ever-present fear of disease. With so many bodies in one tub, with warm water a perfect breeding ground for bacteria, it's no surprise that illness sometimes followed. After the Black Death, suspicion of bathhouses grew, and many shut down entirely. People decided it was safer to stay dirty than risk soaking in contaminated water. Imagine that you long for cleanliness, but society begins to whisper that bathing itself might kill you. Still, in this moment, as steam curls around your face and the water's warmth seeps into your aching limbs, you can almost forget the lice, the dirt, and the endless scratching. For a fleeting hour, you feel a little more human, until the attendant yells for the next group, and you're herded out dripping, slipping on the wet planks, and back into the cold medieval streets. And just like that, your rare bath is over. You're cleaner than yesterday, but only barely. By tomorrow, you'll be itchy and grimy again, and the bathhouse gossip will have moved on without you. You shuffle through the narrow alleys of the town, stomach twisting from the questionable stew you had earlier. Now comes the real challenge: finding a place to relieve yourself. In the medieval city, toilets are not cozy porcelain thrones with scented candles nearby. They are crude, smelly, and often shared. You probably won't survive this either, not with your nose intact. If you live in a simple cottage, your toilet is little more than a bucket or wooden box with a hole carved on top. Once it's full, someone, usually the unlucky youngest, has to carry it out and dump it into a cesspit or straight into the street. Nighttime is when night soil men trudge around, hauling waste away in heavy barrels. You imagine the stench wafting through the village, heavy in the air, clinging to their clothes. And you thought your chores were bad. In towns, wealthier homes sometimes have privies. Tiny rooms built over pits dug deep into the ground. A wooden plank with a hole serves as your seat. Sounds simple, right? Except those pits fill up quickly. Overflowing cesspits leak into nearby wells and basements, turning drinking water into poison. You hold your breath just thinking about it. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Many castles had garderobes, which were small chambers jutting out over the walls with holes leading straight down into the moat. Waste dropped directly into the water below. Imagine standing guard under that wall. Definitely not a glamorous job. In fact, some historians say castle attackers would aim to block off garderobes to force unsanitary conditions inside, weaponizing human waste. And then comes a wonderfully odd detail. In some towns, people believed tossing buckets of waste into the street was acceptable as long as they shouted "Gardaloo," a warning to anyone passing underneath. Picture yourself walking innocently down an alley, only to hear that call above and duck as slop rains down. It's like medieval dodgeball, but grosser. Scholars still argue whether medieval people genuinely believed the smell itself, miasma, caused disease, or if they knew the problem lay in contaminated water. What's certain is that waste disposal shaped the rhythm of daily life. Whole neighborhoods were defined by how bad they smelled, and cesspits often had to be dug out by hand. Imagine being the laborer lowered into a pit of filth, scraping muck into buckets. You'd want double pay, but in reality it was the lowest of the low jobs. Public toilets did exist in some cities. Long benches with holes lined up side by side. Privacy? Forget it. You squat shoulder to shoulder with neighbors, merchants, or strangers, all while flies buzz around. Conversations continue as if nothing unusual is happening. You might hear gossip about the bishop's feast, complaints about bread prices, or whispered confessions, all over the sound of splashing below. The bathroom is just another social stage. Of course, this waste doesn't vanish. Night soil collectors cart it off, sometimes selling it as fertilizer to farmers. Fields fertilized this way grow crops that feed the town. So yes, you're eating bread grown from wheat nourished by last week's cesspit. Circle of life, medieval edition. The smell is everywhere. Clings to walls, rushes, clothes. No matter where you walk, some corner reeks of urine, dung, or rotting waste. Even noble halls with tapestries and candles can't fully mask it. You lie down at night and the stink lingers in your nostrils. A constant reminder that sanitation is a battle no one really wins here. Every trip to the toilet is a gamble. Will you slip on wet planks? Will the pit collapse under you? Will you accidentally drink water tainted by your own cesspit? Each choice carries risks, and the line between survival and sickness feels razor thin. So when you sit on that rough wooden seat, you grip the sides, pray for a quick moment, and try not to breathe too deeply. And as you stand up again, brushing straw from your clothes, you can't help but wonder, how does anyone get used to this? The truth is, they don't. They just endure it. And so must you. Your stomach is queasy, your body itchy. But tonight, it's your teeth that betray you. A dull ache pulses at the back of your jaw, throbbing with every heartbeat. You press your tongue against the swollen gum, and the taste of iron and rot spreads across your mouth. Congratulations, you're about to discover the nightmare of medieval dentistry. There's no toothpaste in a neat plastic tube waiting by a sink. Instead, people rub their teeth with rough linen cloths, salt, or crushed herbs like sage. If you're lucky, maybe you find a mixture of charcoal and mint, harsh but cleansing. The trouble is, sugar is beginning to arrive in Europe, expensive but slowly spreading among the wealthy, and with it comes cavities. You imagine lords and ladies showing off imported sweetmeats, unaware they're rotting their smiles from the inside out. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Tooth decay was so common that many skulls found in medieval graves show severe cavities, abscesses, and missing molars. The pain wasn't just mild discomfort. It was agony that could last weeks or months. Without antibiotics, an infection could even turn fatal if it spread deeper into the body. Odd little remedies spring up everywhere. Some households recommend chewing fennel seeds to freshen breath. Others swear by rinsing the mouth with vinegar or wine. Then there's the truly bizarre: tying a dead mole's foot around your neck to cure a toothache. Yes, really. You picture yourself, groaning in pain, with a tiny rodent paw dangling like some cursed amulet. The ache doesn't vanish, but you've got great conversation material at the bathhouse. Scholars still argue whether medieval people truly understood the link between diet and tooth decay, or if they saw it purely as a punishment from God. Some medical texts warn against eating sticky foods, while others insist toothache is caused by worms burrowing into the enamel. Imagine lying awake, convinced a little creature is tunneling into your molar. That's the kind of paranoia you don't sleep through. When the pain grows unbearable, you have one option: extraction. There's no sterile dentist chair, no numbing injection, no cheerful assistant handing over floss. Instead, you find a barber surgeon, the same man who trims beards and sets broken bones. He sits you on a stool in the open market. Curious onlookers gather, waiting to see blood. He grips your jaw with one hand, a pair of iron pliers in the other, and yanks with brutal force. The crack echoes in your skull. Pain flares white-hot as the tooth tears free, roots and all. There's no anesthetic, just the raw scream you can't hold back. Blood gushes down your chin. The crowd watches, some cheering, some wincing, while the barber wipes his tools on a rag and pockets your coin. You stumble away, light-headed, but at least the worst of the pain is gone. For now. Infection is still a risk, and without clean instruments, you may have traded one agony for another. Wealthy nobles sometimes tried more delicate treatments. They rinsed with honey water, believed to have healing properties, or rubbed their gums with cloves for numbing. Alchemists experimented with powders made from burnt bone, coral, or even crushed pearls. Yet in the end, no one escapes decay. Kings and queens alike suffer rotting breath, yellowed teeth, and agonizing abscesses. You're in noble company, but misery doesn't feel better when it's shared. At night, you lie in your straw bed, clutching your cheek, praying for relief. Each throb keeps you awake, each pang of hunger made worse because chewing is unbearable. The simplest act, eating bread, drinking ale, becomes a torment. You dream of modern comforts: toothbrushes, dentists with bright lights, painless fillings. But in this world, the only cure is pain itself. So you groan, you endure, you grit your teeth, well, the ones you still have. And you realize, with a grim smile, that in the medieval city, your mouth is yet another battlefield where survival is never guaranteed. You wake the next morning, still scratching at bites and wincing from your aching jaw, and you reach for your clothes. They feel stiff, scratchy, and faintly damp, even though you swore you hung them to dry. Welcome to the reality of medieval laundry, where clean is a relative word, and nothing ever smells as fresh as you hope. Most people own just a few garments: a linen shirt, a wool tunic, maybe a cloak. Washing them too often is risky, since the harsh methods wear fabric thin. So you keep wearing the same shirt day after day, until the collar turns dark with sweat and the cuff stiff with grime. You tug it over your head anyway, the smell clinging like an old friend who refuses to leave. Here's a mainstream historical fact: laundering clothes wasn't a weekly household chore, but a rare event. In towns, washerwomen gathered at riversides or communal washhouses, beating clothes with wooden paddles and scrubbing them on rough boards. They soaked fabrics in lye, a caustic mix of ashes and water, that burned skin as easily as it cleaned cloth. If you hand your shirt to them, you risk it returning thinner, faded, and frayed. But what choice do you have? Odd details abound. Sometimes people sprinkled lavender or rosemary between folded garments to mask odors, turning wardrobes into fragrant herb closets. Others believed simply airing clothes in the sun was good enough. And then there's the unsettling practice of using stale urine as a cleaning agent. Yes, you heard that right. Urine was collected in pots, fermented until pungent, and poured over fabrics as a natural bleach. Imagine leaning over a tub of steaming laundry, breathing in ammonia until your eyes water. Congratulations, your shirt might be brighter, but you'll smell like the privy for days. Scholars still argue whether medieval townspeople cared more about cleanliness or about appearances. Some suggest that neat, mended clothes signaled respectability even if they weren't truly clean. Others argue that odor was so normal, so pervasive, that no one thought twice about it. You, meanwhile, pull your tunic tighter and try to ignore the sour whiff that follows you down the street. Wealthy households fared only slightly better. Nobles wore finer fabrics, silk, velvet, brocade, but these were rarely washed at all. Instead, they were brushed, perfumed, or dusted with powders to hide stains. The result? Gorgeous outfits that looked rich under candlelight but reeked after a single feast. Servants bore the task of scraping grease, wine, or worse from delicate sleeves, knowing the garments themselves might outlive their own lifespans. Undergarments, if you own any, are your only real buffer. Linen shifts absorb sweat and oils, sparing outer layers. But even these are washed infrequently, leaving you sticky, itchy, and often covered in lice. Fleas hide in the folds of wool cloaks, mites cling to seams, and laundry day never comes soon enough. You imagine trudging to the riverbank, arms full of soiled linens, joining a line of washerwomen. They chatter, laugh, and sometimes curse as they beat shirts against stones, sending droplets flying. The river carries away the filth, though not always successfully. Clothes return stiff, heavy, and faintly muddy. You haul them back, hang them on hedges or ropes, and pray for sun. But more often than not, clouds roll in, dampening fabric until it grows mildew before it dries. At night, you slide beneath the blanket, pressing your nose into your sleeve. The fabric smells of sweat, smoke, and faintly of the sheep that once wore it. Scratches your skin, irritating every bite and bruise. Yet you remind yourself, this is normal. Everyone around you smells the same. Nobody is fresh, nobody is crisp, and nobody gets to feel the luxury of truly clean clothes. The irony? When plague sweeps through, some blame dirty garments as carriers of disease, while others believe frequent washing weakens the body. So whether you clean your clothes or leave them foul, someone insists you're doing it wrong. You sigh, realizing that even your wardrobe is a trap. So tomorrow you'll wake, slip into the same itchy shirt, and carry on. Because here, in the medieval city, clean isn't a goal. It's an illusion, and you, wrapped in stale linen, just have to live with it. You lie down at last, exhausted from the day's endless battle against dirt, vermin, and filth. The straw mattress beneath you is lumpy, the blanket stiff, and every inch of your skin seems to crawl with invisible tormentors. Fleas, lice, mites. They all conspire to keep you awake. Scratching is constant, maddening, and strangely rhythmic, like a cruel lullaby. You roll over, hoping to find one comfortable position, but the tiny bites wait patiently for you, like clockwork. Even wealth can't save you here. Nobles suffer too. Those feather beds, fine linens, and perfumed hangings are breeding grounds for the very creatures you despise. Every scratch echoes in the quiet hall, and even the grandest bedrooms cannot mask the hum of itching. You realize that in medieval times, no one truly sleeps untouched by discomfort. Rest is never complete. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Studies of medieval skeletons reveal not just dental decay, but chronic infections likely worsened by lice and poor hygiene. People carried parasites constantly, and outbreaks of disease were fueled by the very living conditions that made cities thrive. You shiver, remembering the piles of waste, the overflowing cesspits, and the crowded streets, all part of a fragile ecosystem teetering between survival and sickness. Odd quirks pepper daily life. Some people wore small pouches of herbs or scented cloths pinned to clothing, hoping to repel fleas. Others slept with hot coals near their bedding, believing smoke would chase pests away. The results? Often minimal. You can picture yourself trying both, scratching one arm while fanning smoke with the other, and realize the futility. Scholars still argue whether people adapted to these conditions or merely endured them. Did constant exposure make them more resilient or just miserable? You feel the answer in your own skin, throbbing with bites, hair sticking to sweat, and lungs filled with smoke and stench. Adaptation is slow. Endurance is all you have. Despite it all, life goes on. Markets bustle, children play in muddy streets, and the world continues its noisy, chaotic rhythm. You rise in the morning, bruised, scratched, and smelling faintly of herbs and sweat, and you do it all over again. There is no true escape. Hygiene is a fleeting dream, cleanliness a rarity, and comfort a whispered rumor from a future you'll never see. Yet somehow humans persist. You persist. You endure because life in a medieval city demands it. Each ache, each itch, each foul breath is a reminder that survival is measured not by luxury, but by tolerance of discomfort. You scratch once more, sigh, and accept it. Fleas may bite, teeth may rot, clothes may itch, but you are still here. You are still alive. And as night closes around the city, the endless hum of insects and murmurs of neighbors lull you, almost soothingly, into a strange, weary peace. You close your eyes, bite clenching in stubborn endurance, and let the world continue outside while you drift into a restless, flea-bitten sleep.